I'm really enjoy. This is Dr. Rosensweet. I'm really enjoying my time in Facebook. You all are coming up with some really important questions, and I want to review two of them that have come in, and they were in response to a comment I made earlier. And the first one is that, but I think a lot of us are aiming for, quote, youthful levels, end quote, because that's where we feel best, slash, most like ourselves. Is there anything inherently wrong with dosing by how you feel? As long as the E, estrogen, is balanced by enough P, would the cancer risk be reduced? Thinking about young women with these same hormone levels who don't have high cancer risk. Totally believe and hear what you're saying. Honestly, just trying to learn more as I approach the age when I'll be making some of these. And then there's a second question that comes in. What's the benefit of keeping hormone levels below youthful levels after menopause? Wouldn't it be much more beneficial to bring those hormone levels back to youthful? All right, let's go. The one thing that is the question mark in the room that has not been satisfied in my explorations of hormones is, does this at all relate to breast cancer risk? Because as I grew up in menopause, a couple things happened. I'm 25 years into treating women in menopause with bioidentical hormones. A couple things happened. One was the question of whether estrogen, really, Premarin and Provera, put women at risk for breast cancer. And the other thing that came up for me, and excuse me, I'm going to back up. I feel much, much better about this than I did earlier in my career, and it's all because of a book called Estrogen Matters. And it's by Avram Blooming and Carol Tavris. And for any of you who really want to explore this topic in depth and take a look at the bottom line, am I putting myself at risk by high hormone levels? I urge you to read Estrogen Matters by Blooming and Tavris. Now, here's another thing that happened to me in the course of my career. I'm 50 years a doctor. I have met and wound up being medically involved with women who've had breast cancer. I've actually had two patients that came to me after the breast cancer was diagnosed and asked did I have any complementary treatment for that breast cancer. And it turned out that these two young women died of breast cancer. And, you know, when you talk to doctors, very often we have a different perspective because we've met up with actual human beings where these possibilities that are out there, they actually exist. So why am I talking about this? Because the bottom line in menopause medicine and dealing with hormones is safety. And the bottom line in menopause method is breast safety. I mean, what else is there? How do you do the very best treatment for the longest period of time? I'm talking 10, 20, 30, 40 years here of hormone treatment and keep the risk for breast cancer at the absolute minimum. And I'm skewed by my experience. I've also had women who've developed breast cancer while they were being treated. So that's why speaking to a medical doctor who treats women, might get a different opinion. You might get different emotions come forward. And it's the absolute bottom line for our whole method is how do we keep risk for an absolute minimum? Well, every single month in a young menstruating woman's life, there's preparation for possible lactation. That means that at the beginning of a new menstrual cycle, as you build towards the middle of that cycle, let's say day 12, 14, you're instituting hormonal changes that actually affect the breasts. And the effect that they're looking for, so to speak, them, those hormones are looking for, is to proliferate breast glandular cells in anticipation of a possible pregnancy and lactation, right there in the middle of every cycle. In other words, breast glandular cells proliferate. There's mitosis. Cells divide. And extra cells are added. Oh my God, preparing that early for possible lactation? Yeah, it's happening every month. And should it turn out that there is no pregnancy, there's deproliferation. There's actual loss through a process called apoptosis, dissolving essentially of the additional cells once a month. And many women feel this. Many women feel their breasts become fuller as they throughout their cycle, and then their breasts come back to not full. There's actual cellular mitosis and proliferation. And as a physician named Alan Altman commented in a medical journal, and you can look him up, he says, to continue mitosis in a menopausal woman by giving her dosages that perpetuate her cycle doesn't seem wise, because the more mitosis that occur, the more the risk there is for a genetic change towards cancer. And this is something we want to avoid. We don't want a genetic change to occur that where there's a loss of the ability to differentiate into healthy glandular cells, to de-differentiate into non-controlled cells called cancer cells. So Dr. Altman's making a case, why put a woman who's growing older and has, in most instances, less robust, less avaricious immune system to pick up aberrant cells, cells that have undergone mutation away from what they were. It doesn't make common sense to keep mitosis going in a woman whose immune system is unlikely to be as avaricious and as strong, as intense, and as successful as a young woman's immune system. Now, let me tell you something else I found out. I'm very, very familiar with the dosages it takes to sustain a woman's period who's going into menstruation, or to restore a woman's period who's ceased menstruating, because there has been a way of approaching menopause by recommending youthful levels. Well, the phenomenal thing is, I had 3 patients that came to me over a period of time that were on one of these programs, youthful levels, to sustain the period, and they didn't feel well. And I said, well, prior to you ceasing the program that you're on, why don't we wait a day or two, and here's a 24-hour urine hormone test. Let's see what levels you actually have on the doses that you're taking. And much to my surprise, the women, there was 3 different women that I tested, it took 3 to 8 times the estrogen levels, 3 to 8 times the upper limit of normal, 3 to 8 times the upper limit of normal of what a young woman between 20 and 29 would need to have a period. Oh my God, 3 to 8 times the upper limit of normal to sustain or restore a menstrual period? Yeah. And I actually showed these urine results, hormone results, to one of the someone who felt very strongly that this was a good way to go. And that just didn't make sense to me. And I learned that there's a heck of a lot more to a period and menstruation than just youthful estrogen levels. Just as another thing, what's missing from a pure estradiol is estriol. Like a young woman's body has twice as much estriol as she's got the sum of the 2 most potent estrogens, estrone and estradiol. So I never understood why I only treat with estradiol. And here's another thing. Cancer, breast cancer, like any cancer, is a very complex topic. I mean, what does it take for someone to develop a cancer? The way I've explained it to patients before is let's pretend that we had a video of you from the time you were conceived up until this very moment, and that the video editor was pressed a button to eliminate all the good stuff, all the happiness, all the good nutrition, all the exercise, everything that obviously promoted health. The button the video editor pressed eliminated all that good stuff. What would remain is thousands and thousands of health adverse events. Stress that wasn't handled well, dietary indiscretions, the taking in of toxicity, insufficient or excessive exercise. That, to me, at least theoretically, is the truer story of how we develop cancer, not to mention the multidimensional emotional and spiritual issues that relate to getting an illness so strong that it could cause us to transition from living on Earth in this particular lifetime. If this is getting blurry for you, so be it. This is what medicine's about. There's complexities that we don't necessarily have our finger on. So I resort to what seems best to me after reading hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of articles, scientific articles. And in scientific articles, there's the good, the bad, and the ugly. You can prove anything you want in faulty science. But we were taught in medical school how to sort out the junk science from the really good stuff. And when I put all of that together, and my own personal experience in treating patients, and my fundamental goal in treating patients and in treating women in menopause is do no harm. Thus, we developed a method that, from our perspective, the chances of developing breast cancer are at the absolute minimum. Being treated with hormones puts a woman at less risk for breast cancer than not being treated with hormones. But what you're mentioning is supraphysiologic dosages of hormones, dosages that are higher than in a young woman. And that's where my challenge is. And I take you back to Dr. Altman and his discussion about mitoses. And do we really want mitoses happening? Well, here's what we know from the medical literature is how much hormone does it take to actually produce breast glandular cell proliferation. And just to give you a visual of this, let's say a young woman's estrogen levels throughout the population varied somewhere in here. This was the range, because not all women have the same estrogen levels. Well, it turns out that we can extrapolate from the scientific literature what it takes to give the benefits of hormones without mitosis, without risk of breast glandular cell proliferation. And it's here. These are the estrogen levels, for example, that fall shy of producing breast glandular cell proliferation. The ceiling is right there. Isn't that interesting? It's at the bottom of youthful levels. It takes this much estrogen to produce monthly mitoses, whereas if you fall below that, you don't get mitoses. And so what do we choose? We choose estrogen levels that do not produce breast glandular cell proliferation, and we monitor this. We do mammograms, we do thermograms when it's important to see if there's inflammation in the breast. We monitor every aspect of treating a woman in menopause with hormones. The best information in the medical literature, it just doesn't take that much to do very important things for a woman. And what those are retaining bone health, so a woman has enough estrogen so she's not losing bone, and retaining vaginal health, because you want a woman to not get into irritating the bladder, and of course there's other reasons for having good vaginal health. How much does that take to do that? Those are two really important low ends of things. At the upper end of things, it's really about not having too much estrogen to promote breast glandular cell proliferation. So you sort of get an idea of where I stand in all this, since we're talking about treating women for 10, 20, 30, 40 years with hormones, because that's a subject for another video. You can see where I would want to stay below any dose of estrogen that produce breast glandular cell mitosis, breast glandular cell proliferation. And I see that there's been some questions that have come in around this. Well, I am going to pause in responding to this because this is such a poignant question. And in general, you look at everything. And if you're a physician that's seen breast cancer, you pay more careful attention. I shouldn't say that. I mean, every woman who cares about her health can pay plenty careful attention. But I refer you to Alan Altman's, he's a medical doctor, his article on perpetuating menstruation, and on the book Estrogen Matters by Auburn Blooming. Well, I know that was a long answer, but it was an important question, and I wish you all so well in learning what's best for you. One other thing. Do you know, you never say never in medicine. I have a physician friend who told me her story, that her mom had dementia, and her aunt had dementia, and in her early 50s, she's a practicing medical doctor. She's telling me she's losing her ability to think. And this has gone on long enough that she's going, I have to give up my career. I'm going to my office. I can't keep things straight anymore. And of course, she's looking down the barrel of her mother and her aunt, her mother's sister. And she says, so what she started doing, she knew that estrogen could make a difference in cognitive function. So she started taking estrogen, and she kept on taking estrogen. She started to clear up. And she kept on taking until she arrived at the dosage that restored her cognition. You know what? It brought her periods back. And I said, I smiled. I was so grateful. I was so touched. I had tears in my eyes. So you never say never. There's always exceptions. But I would call that the exception in the end. The world is cognition. So a whole other subject. Best wishes to you all. I've gone on for so long in this particular answer.